Good afternoon. My name is David Imhotep, and I wanted to thank Dr. Asante and everyone else who had something to do with putting this together and just letting me speak here. This is so wonderful. I want to thank him. Thank you. I would first like to, for those of you who have never heard ancient Egyptian spoken, I'm going to do a short ancient Egyptian prayer. Nuk heka'u pui, ra neta'u hare wahti imlae, nuk re ya'u, nuk bafe heka'u. So we'll be talking about today, briefly, about the African Aqualithic, a time when the Sahara was wet. As we all know, that thanks to Dr. Diop's book, first book, that the interest in Kemet exploded. He wrote about cultural continuity in Africa, which is what I will be talking about. But how did cultural continuity begin? As we see, this is Egypt, and down here you see Nubia starts. Well, before Egypt, of course, the Egyptians walked up from Nubia, from Kustu, and gave Egypt its civilization and its culture. As you can see right down here, Kustu, should have been Taseti. That was the first civilization that we know of that gave Egypt its civilization. Now, but where did the people from Taseti came from? Well, the Egyptians said in the papyrus of Hunefer and the papyrus of Edfu says, quote, "We came from the beginning of the Nile, where the god Hapi dwells, at the foot of the mountain of the moon." There are two mountains of the moon. Okay, can someone, this is not working. Just press enter button. There we are. I'm just going to put it down. It works. Here's the mountain of the moon. Next. And where is the mountain of the moon? The mountain of the moon is found, it's found here in Tanzania, between Tanzania and Kenya, right there. You see right there. So that's where they say they came from. And if you look at this Olduvai Gorge, it's where the bones of the first humans were found, and Leakey gets the benefit of that, saying that. Here in Rwanda, it doesn't show here on the map, but that is where Lake Edward is, and I will be speaking of Lake Edward next in a few more minutes. So this is where they came from, that area. Now, as I said before, the Sahara was not always dry. It was wet at one time. And here is a 1981 a picture from the space shuttle of the Sahara. And what they did was they shot ground-penetrating radar. And as it went across the Sahara, it penetrated this area right here. And you can see, what do you see here? You see remains of dry riverbeds. Well, yes, the Sahara was fertile, and it had a network of rivers. Yeah. Okay? Next. It had huge lakes. As here you see now Lake Chad. This was at the time of the Aqualithic. It was a lot more rain. So Chad was 7 times as large as it is now, 151,000 square miles, 600 feet deep, 7 times as large. And the lakes, the rivers were larger too. Now there also was a sea in France. A sea in Libya that was as large as France, called the Albion or the Triton Sea. Now, have any of you ever heard of African Aqualithic civilization? I don't see one hand. And that is by design. Okay? I won't go into that, but I couldn't find it in any school books anywhere. So the African period changed Africa, and the people had to adapt to the Aqualithic culture. Begins where did it begin, however? Where did it begin? Well, this next one is a map. Go ahead. In 1974, Sutton was the first person to write in a journal about this. Now, he is a conservative, and he says that the Aqualithic began around where Lake Rudolph is, and that's about right here in that area. But that still comprises our area right here, so he's very close to the truth. Now, why did he pick that area? Because he found harpoons. Harpoons dated back to his date of Aqualithic, which is very conservative. 9 to 2000 BC. Okay? They had harpoons, which they fished with. They had dotted and wavy line pottery that dated around 9000 BC. Next. Here we have, right here is Lake Edward. Now, Ashango's right there, but 4 miles up is Katanga. At Katanga, they found the oldest harpoons, 90,000 years old, bone harpoons. Now, this culture, which means 90,000 years old, means that this culture started approximately 90,000 years ago. Okay? Next. Here are the harpoons that we are talking about. This is a harpoon right here, and you see right here, that is a spear point, and that is carved out of bone. Now, next, here we will see down south, another place is here in Swaziland. We have the first evidence of mathematics in the Lubombo bone, 35,000 BC. Over here, this is a Kalahari Desert that we'll be going into later. Just memorize this because I won't be showing this slide again. The Ashango, next, the Ashango map shows us that here is Ashango. Now, remember 4 miles up here was Katanga 90,000 years ago. Ashango's evidence comes from 25,000 years ago. So it's a possibility that Lake Edward was larger and Ashango was underneath the water at that time. Okay? Then 25,000 BC, it's above water. And you see in Ashango, we have more documentation of another bone, the Ashango bone, which is 25,000 BC. Next. And you'll see on the Ashango bone, it has markings. These markings represent mathematics, base 10 decimal system. And what they were counting there was they were tracking the moon, movements of the moon. And this is 25,000 BC. Now, Princeton Professor Joseph and Professor Williams said that at Ashango they actually grew crops. And this is against all the academians out here who talk about ancient Egypt. Next. Nabta Playa is another place where you'll see brilliance in the ancient African Aqualithics. Nabta Playa is right down here, 100 miles 100 miles west of the Nile. Now there, as Dr. Martin talked about, they found a African Stonehenge. They dug down into the sand 12 feet, 10 to 12 feet, and they found etched into the stone a map, carved in the stone of our Milky Way as seen from above the galactic center. And this was the Milky Way as it was seen 17,700 BC, which is almost 20,000 years ago. Now, this is incredible. That means that they had to have a date of a knowledge of astronomy in order to say the rocks at the top show radial velocity of the stars, and that has dual implications. Number one, you have to have knowledge of physics to realize that. You have to be able to calculate it, which physics was invented, which calculus was invented for. And then you have the notice of, they said the stars were moving away from them, which means they had a knowledge that the universe was expanding 20,000 years ago. Didn't we just find that out about 10 or 20 years ago, that our universe was expanding? So these people were no savages. They had not only knowledge of these sciences, but they had a civilization, obviously, because of knowing these different things. Okay, next. So the African Aqualithic civilization spreads like this. It starts here, it goes down, starts here 90,000 years ago, it goes down here to Botswana 80,000 years ago, and we have in Swaziland 35,000 years ago, Lubombo bone, then back up to Lake Edward 25,000 years ago, the Lubombo, right, and the Ashango bone here, then it comes up all the way to Egypt, up Khartoum, Fayum, it even goes here into Mesopotamia, and then it goes also west at the same time. Next. Now, how did they make these trips? Well, if you remember that everything possibly was 7 times as large, here's the Rift Valley. And if you look and you see all these rivers how they are now, can you imagine them larger than that? There was a conduit, or a I-95 of water. Okay? And this is how they get down here. All right? Next. As they go down down here and they go to the west, you see Tuscaloosa. I don't know if you've read about that. There's in here there's a white a White Plains shelter or White Plains cave where they found harpoons and other things. And that's where they found the 80,000-year-old harpoons, right down in that area. And you'll see right here, it's a swamp now, but it was a lake at that time. And these rivers here were a lot larger. Next. So you'll see in this next slide, next, you'll see an old drawing of the Aqualithic, where they came from. Right in here, they went south and they went north. 5 minutes left, okay? Now, who were the people of the African Aqualithic? Next, Cole unbelievably mentions that the prevalent assumption is that Caucasian influence, this is a quote, he said, a prevalent assumption is that Caucasian influence was prominent in East Africa during the Aqualithic, unquote. No. Even Professor Kuhn found this ridiculous, and he's the same Kuhn who was quoted as saying, quote, if Africa was the cradle of mankind, it was only an indifferent kindergarten. Europe and Asia were our principal schools, unquote. Ridiculous, even to him. Okay? But Kuhn did write that Professor Patterson's found human remains, specifically, quote, cranial and post-bone bones of the Shango people show them to have been Negroes, and Sutton and Leakey agreed. So the first Caucasians to enter Egypt were brought there by Seti I during 19th dynasty, 1280 BC. So Caucasians, put in context, first entered Egypt or Africa for the first time as prisoners of war after Seti I defeated the first alliance of European and Caucasians. So, if this is true, how could Caucasians have had any contact, much less influence on Africa, thousands of years before? Okay? There were no Caucasians on Earth, by the way, until 15,000 years BC, and here we have the Aqualithic culture starting 80,000 BC, so how could they have done anything? So, the first and earliest Africans in the Aqualithic tradition were short Africans called the Anu, the Twa and the Khoi. For that information. Next, as you go west right in here, we found, and now this is really something. Last month, National Geographic has a picture and an article about these people right here who they found in the African Aqualithic. 8,000-year-old graves they found. 200 of them were harpoons for fishing, dotted and wavy line pottery. Next. And the people, as you can see right here, were the Kithian people. They were tall, they were muscular, they were fishing with harpoons, they were catching little fish and some small, larger fish right here, perched 200 to 300 pounds. All right, next. And you'll see this next slide, it has an exquisite bone fish hook right here. And look at that. This is right here is from the Kithian 9,000 years ago. If you look at the next slide, you'll see that the old 80,000-year-old harpoons here match this almost identical. So you see a cultural continuity which is keeping us to knowing that they had contact. Okay, so harpoons found in the Shango 25,000 years ago, then Lobambo 35,000, Kalahari 80,000, and Katanda 90,000 years. So it points to a single cultural tradition. The time gap between the three indicate an exceedingly long cultural continuity. So, continuity. In conclusion, the Afro-Aqualithic culture spread rapidly across Africa from southern Rift Valley north and so on. Okay? This Afro-Aqualithic culture was best known for its harpoon spears and later for its pottery. The evidence presented here leads to the realization that Sutton's 9,000-year-old date for a wetter climate of his 9,000 BCE date for the Aqualithic may now have to be pushed back to at least between 25 and 90,000 BC. You can read more about this. I think Molefi might be publishing this in his journal. So, this African civilization did not come from the south, skip over Egypt, make a civilization in Mesopotamia, turn from black to white, and then bring their nice white civilization back to the poor Africans. It did not happen. My dissertation contains evidence in 9 multidisciplinary study areas, 9 disciplinary areas, that the Nile Valley civilization predates the one in Mesopotamia. In fact, the first one in Mesopotamia was Sumer, which was made by black Africans anyway. Now this hard evidence that reveals that there is misinformation, factoids found in history from textbooks that must be changed and corrected with this updated information. So I have it right here, okay, self-promotion thing. My dissertation's on that. I'll have it afterwards. So there is no doubt that the Nile Valley civilization or should I say the Rift Valley civilization, predated any other in the world that is known of today. Thank you so much.